All right, lovely. Good morning, everyone. I thought I'd wake everyone up with a little bit of humor this morning. So today we are going to be learning about some fabulous food trends. Totally not a disguised metaphor. So a couple of months ago, I was in San Francisco near Honeycomb's headquarters, and I was about to check into my hotel, and I spotted that there was a really, really cute ice cream shop. This is an iconic ice cream shop from San Francisco. It is called Humphrey Slocum. If you do go to the US, I know it's kind of a little bit out of fashion right now. But if you do go to the US and go to San Francisco, I do highly recommend Humphrey Slocum's ice cream. But here's a really interesting thing. So I went and I was like looking at the display case and I was like, chocolate dipped strawberry. That sounds delicious. Like let's go ahead and have some. And it was fabulous. But that got me thinking about why is it that we think that chocolate and strawberries go so well together? Like what is it about that combination that makes it so iconically classic? So today, this morning, we're going to talk about chocolate and hopefully keep you not falling asleep because it is bright and early on the second day of our conference. So why is it so delicious? Why do we use it in all of our, in a lot of dessert dishes as well as, some non-dessert dishes? And why is there not chocolate in literally everything? Like how do we make sure that we use the right amount of chocolate everywhere? So to bring it back to technology and IT, a friend of mine said that he was sick and tired of seeing AI everywhere. And I agree. Like, I think that AI should not go in everything. And I think that there are recipes for how we think about how to judiciously and carefully use chocolate instead of just smearing it in everything. So this take got hundreds of likes on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and so forth. So I was like, okay, like this is the talk that I'm giving in Wollongong. So in particular, I think how many of you have seen the microwave cooking is the future of how we cook? Okay, a couple of you. I encourage you to go look it up, right? Like, but it's the, hey, we have just replaced everything with microwaves. Microwaves are the future. We're going to have to, deploy nuclear data centers nuclear power plants in order to power microwave-based cooking for the kitchen, right? Like, and it's like, no. We're not replacing all of our kitchens with microwaves, and we're not replacing all of our ingredients with a chocolate fountain, right? It does not work that way. And just because I criticize misuse of chocolate or AI does not mean that I'm entirely opposed to it. So, yesterday in the morning you had a glass half full view of AI as the kind of wave of the future. Today I am the glass half empty, but still, there is water in it. It's not toxic. It's not going to kill you. So, we all know health food fads, right? How many of you have had a wheatgrass shot in the past 2 weeks? Anyone? No. Okay. How about a lovely scoop of frozen acai berry? Like that's you see the acai shops all over Australia, right? Okay, right. So just, that's pretty all right. And then lastly and finally, how many of you have had kale recently? Right. So some of the popular health food fads are around to stay, others are not, right? And remember when every single company, about 2 or 3 years ago, was VR powered or blockchain powered, right? At least blockchain was deterministic, let's say. But how many of you actually use a VR headset to have one-on-ones with your colleagues? Yeah, I thought not, right? So people said, the metaverse is going to change everything, and of course it didn't. And here's what really pisses me off. The thing is that when we have all of these fads like this, they really put people off of genuinely new, novel technology that can help us all, right? Because it's made us all so jaded that we're just like, oh no, not this again. And then we're rolling our eyes, right? Like, and we're just like, AI does nothing, AI is useless, right? Like, and we can just ignore it hard enough and it'll go away. It is not going away, and I think that we need to wake up to that. So, I think that the reality is that, yes, there is hype, there is a bubble, and also there is some really, really useful stuff. And just because it's a fad does not mean you should write it off entirely. And, yes, there was a period of time in which you were having kale smoothies and you were having, kale dietary supplements, right? And we eventually backed off and said, kale is great in salads, but let's not put it in everything. So my viewpoint on AI is, 2 or 3 years ago, I was definitely like, oh my God, I hate this sucks. Why are companies trying to shove this down my throat? But I listen to data, and I am a pragmatist, and I've realized that in some of the hype, there was also some real value that we can use as DevOps engineers. And yes, this causes all kinds of people to hate me on the internet, because the people who love AI say, why are you being so down and so negative about it? And the people who hate some of the excesses of AI are like, Liz, why are you promoting AI, right? I'm not here to please any of these people. I'm here to do things that are useful for my job and to help you all get more done at work. Okay, back to chocolate. How many of you have seen this episode of Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares? This is the episode set in Spain where Gordon Ramsay is visiting a British cafe owner who has set up shop to cater to British expats in Spain. And one of his signature dishes is prawns and chocolate sauce. Ugh, disgusting, right? Chocolate is tasty and it doesn't go in everything, right? Why would you put chocolate sauce on prawns? It's just such terrible, terrible combination of flavors, right? So not everything goes well with chocolate. And also, chocolate is not necessarily, beneficial to everyone, right? There are health benefits, there are risks. If you eat loads of lollies, right? You tell your kids after Halloween, don't eat all of those lollies at once, right? And also, right, we should think about how to consume in moderation. Some people are allergic to chocolate, so, maybe we should keep chocolate away from them. And we should, warn people when things contain chocolate rather than just, putting in everything. Knowing when to stop is important, right? Your kids do not necessarily have the judgment to know that, having 5 lollies is too much. And I think that, and yes, there are some species like dogs that are deathly allergic to chocolate, and it'll shut down their organs. It's no good. In particular, though, I think there are we can use AI in our work. I think that's fine. But I think that there are a number of things that are really, really dangerous around using AI for therapy. And in particular, I think the New York Times has done a great job of investigating the dangerousness of AI psychosis and sycophancy and things that basically, right, when you load up chocolate with loads of sugar, right, it tastes really good, you want to eat more and more and more of it, and then you feel sick, right? So this is something on the order of, there was a story this past week that basically said that something like 0.07% of users, 500,000 users, are having signs of psychosis or mania that the chatbot is making worse. And the company knows about it, and they're not fixing it, and that seems like a problem. Okay, we also need to have truth in labeling, right? We need to say when we are using AI to do things, and I think this is for 2 reasons. I think, first of all, it helps people get an idea of, how do you distribute the workload, right? How did you balance what you're doing yourself versus what you're outsourcing to someone else or using automation for? And then that helps people be better equipped to review what you're working on, right? And it also helps people have an understanding of, what is the, what's the appropriate balance of how much of this code base do we truly understand. So, definitely we have to label things clearly, and we have to not use AI for super safety sensitive things, right? Do not build fire escape ladders out of chocolate. That seems just because you can do it does not mean that you should do it. Because, in the event that someone actually has to get out of the burning building, they do not, it doesn't matter whether, they can lick the ladder and it tastes delicious if they can't actually get down safely. And I think, lastly, there's a lot of things where people are, right, there are a lot of influencers in technology. I do count myself among them, right, because I'm standing up on the stage, right? So when we say that something, works great or it's lovely or it's wonderful, right, there are financial incentives involved in terms of people pitching AI. And also, even if there were not financial incentives, right, in terms of the narratives that we select for, how many of you have heard of the publication bias in science, right? Positive results get published, negative results do not get published, right? And therefore, you hear all these things that, we cured cancer in mice, and also this was, one of the 100 studies that succeeded, 99 of those studies failed, right? So when you hear about some, outlandish claim or, this person vibe coded an entire app in a single afternoon, right? Like, remember that that's the one story that you're hearing about, right? Like, that's like the, so I'm actually missing out on AWS reInvent to be here, and I assure you that this is a much better venue and a much better crowd than reInvent. But yes. In Las Vegas, right, like there is a very, very famous baker, pastry artist. His name is Amari Ghosh, and he makes these elaborate sculptures entirely out of chocolate. Are they tasty? Maybe not, right? Like, should you make them at home? No, definitely not, right? Like, chocolate sculpting, right? Like making things just for show, right? Like, leave that to the professionals, right? Like who are doing that as art. But just because it's art does not mean that you should be doing this in your own kitchen. So think a lot about what are you just because you see it on Instagram, because you see it on LinkedIn or Blue Sky or Twitter does not mean that you should be doing it at home. So practicality, not outlandishness for your job. And I think that we tend to, especially in this industry, we've had this pattern of saying, hey, we've just thrown a chatbot on it, right? Like, we're just feeding our users AI slop. Like, this is clearly going to go well, right? I think it's a lot like, rocking up to the dinner table and saying, honey, dinner's served, and then you just have a hunk of chocolate on the table, right? So I think that we need to avoid just serving people lumps of unadulterated chocolate, right? Like, you have to actually cook. You have to actually exercise your creativity. You actually have to, make something out of it rather than just having a block of chocolate on the table. Right? Like, it is true, right? Like, mole is, 90% chocolate, right? Mexican mole is delicious, but it also has spices in it, right? Like, it's been carefully prepared. It's been paired with the right protein, right? Like, it's not just serving chocolate, right? Someone has put some thought and some creativity and some experimentation into actually giving you that dish that you have at your favorite Mexican restaurant, right? I think the other interesting way to think about this is if you are below average at baking, right? Like, putting chocolate flavoring or right, like putting chocolate into your cookies, right? Like, if you are average at making cookies, having chocolate chip cookies makes them probably taste on average a little bit better. If you're much better than average, right, like your job is to exercise your judgment of does chocolate go in this, right? So I think it's this thing where, it's kind of AI is an average coder because it statistically is average, right? Like, because it's been compiled from all of the code in the world. So therefore, I think it behooves us to think about where is it going to bring up the average of our work, and where is it going to regress our work down to the median, right? So we shouldn't just make things just 100% chocolate flavored and nothing else, right? We have to complement human creativity and not just replace it with slop that looks and sounds like everything else that's out there, right? Because otherwise, where is your differentiating value, right? Like, if all you are doing is feeding in your product requirement specs directly into the AI and pasting in whatever it produces, right? Like, we've been there with Stack Overflow before, right? Like, where is the additional value that you're adding as a software developer? What is your special sauce? I think the other thing that is perhaps a little bit frustrating to me is people having these outlandish claims that AI is going to save so much time, right? Like, or it's going to increase productivity so much, right? Like, and I think that is a dramatically misleading claim. The same way that right? Like, you wouldn't say I'm putting chocolate in the souffle, and therefore the chocolate souffle is going to bake 10 minutes faster than the regular souffle. No, it is not going to do that, right? So I think that there are two things that are going on here. First of all, I was actually just talking with the field CTO of DX, the company that just got acquired by Atlassian, who are measuring developer productivity. And what the field CTO of GetDX said is that AI coding assistants are, they're good. They're giving people 3 hours a week back, like out of a 40-hour work week, right? Like that's not terrible. But it turns out people are wasting, 10, 15, 20 hours a week in meetings that are not, not useful to them, right? Why are we optimizing, on a 3-hour a week problem rather than on the 10-hour a week problem? And also, writing code is not a linear process, right? Like we don't sit down to do a task and work on nothing else but that task until that task is done, right? Like, so I think it's really, really tremendously misleading to suggest that, we should be measuring, time to task completion from the time that we start it. And also, I think that, we multitask and we multi-thread so much, right? Like we should be focusing on what's the total throughput of what we're delivering, right? Like what's the total amount of deliciousness that we're delivering and not, how quickly does it take to bake one souffle exactly, right? So plan for things to take the same amount of time or even potentially even longer, right? Some ingredients, right? If you make ice cream with chocolate or if you're baking a chocolate souffle, right? Like maybe it takes longer to cook, right? Like maybe that's fine because you're getting more total unit deliciousness. And I think in the context of AI, right? Like AIs in general, it tends to think and process data slower than humans do in some cases, right? They do output tokens, right? They do output code faster than we do. But I think by the time you account for code review, by the time you account for actually taste testing and make sure everything's all right, it may take slightly longer. So we have to allow for that, right? Like we have to allow doing something with AI might take longer in terms of wall hours, but it might free you up to do more things while it's actually baking, right? And lastly, I think that the term AI is really, really overloaded, right? Like, just because a recipe calls for chocolate does not mean you get to dump white chocolate in it or dark chocolate or bittersweet chocolate in there, right? Like, you have to think carefully about what are we actually using, right? We need to be really, really specific, right? Is this classical ML? Is this a large language model? Are we using retrieval augmented generation, right? Like, what is the name of the technology that we're actually using? Are we being sufficiently specific about it? Or are we just saying, oh, it's AI, right? Like that's the thing that I hate a lot is when people just say, oh, it's AI, right? Like, great, you've told me nothing about what's actually powering your technology. And in particular, as we all know, large language models are not good calculators, right? So I think it's really, really important to understand, what is the nature of the problem we're trying to solve, and therefore applying the right tool, right? We roast LLMs for not knowing how many letters in strawberry there are, but when you think about it, right, like a large language model is not thinking in terms of letters, it is thinking in terms of tokens, right? It's thinking in terms of units of meaning. Of course it doesn't know how many letters are in strawberry, but it can write you a program to count that, right? So I think, when we are using AI, we should think carefully about what's the problem we're trying to solve, what's the right kind of AI to use, right? What's the right kind of chocolate to use in our dish? And here's the ethics slide. And I think this is really, really deeply important. I think that just the same way as, companies like Nestle or Cadbury, go around deforesting the entire planet to produce really cheap, really mediocre chocolate, right? I think the same thing is happening in the world of AI. I think that there is a lot of focus on trying to train on more and more and more data, right? To generate larger and larger and larger and larger language models. And that, the idea that maybe that's going to be the thing, that incremental unit of data is going to be the thing that gives us some kind of so-called artificial general intelligence, right? And I think that the tools are useful enough as they are, right? Why do we need to go and burn the entire planet down in order to get a model that is 5 or 10% more capable, right? I think there are diminishing returns to what these companies are currently doing. And also, some of these companies are mixing in some really, really horrible contaminated things, right? We have models that are being trained on 4chan, on 8chan. We have models that are being trained on all kinds of really, really noxious stuff, right? Like if you go scraping the dark web, right, like you're going to find videos that contain people's intimate images that they haven't authorized, right? Like, and we have models that are being trained on all these tainted ingredients, right? And we all love our cheap chocolate, right? Like the fact that you can go down to the store and buy a lolly for $1, right? But we do have to think about the consequences of our consumerism. We do have to think about the fact that $20 a month ChatGPT is not going to be $20 forever, and that a lot of the reason that it's $20 is because they didn't pay many of their suppliers, right? So we have to take a step back and think about what is the future of this technology? How are we actually going to make sure that it is both useful to us and also that it's fair to the planet, that it's fair to the suppliers? And I think that what's going on with capitalism is a little bit scary here, because fundamentally what's happening, every time you train a model, right, you are setting let's say a $20 bill on fire, right? Like you are literally setting banknotes on fire to train new models with the hope that having set that money on fire, you'll be able to recoup more money. The problem is, then the next person comes along and then they set, 30 Australian dollars on fire or 50 Australian dollars on fire, right? And I think that that's leading to this wasteful spiral, right? Like where the people who are hoping to capture all of this value from us, who are hoping to eventually, if you look at their valuations, they're hoping to capture something like 10% of our salaries in terms of the amount of money that people spend on AI to help us. And they're doing it in this really, really wasteful way, and also they're doing it in a way that potentially reduces everything to tasting like cheap Cadbury's chocolate, right? So I think that we are going to have to, in the next couple of years, think about what's the longer-term view, right? Like, how do we actually get something that is bespoke to us, that is cheap enough to run? And honestly, I think that some of the Chinese companies have it right? Like, of developing models that can actually run on your own laptop, that don't require an entire data center to run, that don't require all of this data to work. But how do things currently stand in the world of in the world of applying AI to DevOps problems? Well, I would argue that yes, it can be expensive. In the course of a single weekend, yes, I did run up about $700 of charges, but that was actually probably worth it, right? Like, let's talk briefly about food again. When you look at the expense of, you go out across the road to coffee, to bread and espresso, right? Like, they're paying a certain amount in ingredient costs and they're paying a certain amount in staff costs, right? If an ingredient is more expensive but means that they have to pay less time in staff costs, right? It's totally economically reasonable for them to take that trade-off, even if the ingredient is more expensive. And I think that's true in the case of feature development or automation development, right? So, sure. Did this one weekend experiment cost $700? Yes. But did it mean that I could actually work on a feature that otherwise I would not be myself qualified to do and would have to wait for a developer on the relevant team to have a look at a month from now? Right? Like, there was a real customer that wanted this feature, and I was able to give that person that feature in the course of a single weekend, right? And also, I wasn't sitting there the entire time, right? Like, I was running my laundry, I was walking my dog, I was doing all kinds of other things while this tool was working. And I think even if this were to cost twice as much, even if it were to cost $1,500, it would still be worth it to deliver better functionality, right? So even if the VC-subsidized era of AI does not last forever, I think that software development is actually one of the use cases that is, because our time is so valuable as software developers, I think that this is really genuinely a great opportunity where the cost of AI going up to account for its actual cost would not cause us to refrain from using AI quite as much, because there's actual value that we get out. Right, so here's the actual feature, right? So Honeycomb has a feature for working with service level objectives and visualizing, how much of your error budget have you spent, which requests were actually slow. And previously, the time range picker for it was non-interactive, right? Like you would have to go and click on the left-right buttons to get to cause it to go back by 2 days or 5 days. And if you wanted to look at data that was 27 days old, you would have to click the back button 27 times, right? I was like, look, this is stupid, right? Like customers want to zoom in on this specific region where it started burning faster, right? Like, why can't we do that? So I said, I showed the AI our code base and said, here's an example of what our time picking, like dragging functionality looks like in another component of our UI. Can you make this widget also have that functionality? And sure enough, it did, right? Like it, took $700. It could even, as far as I was concerned, take $1,500. But the point is that in the course of a weekend, it developed a feature that was mostly production ready, and it just needed polish and review and so forth, right? But the paper prototype of just making the yellow rectangle draggable, that cost $10 in 3 hours. But the making it actually use all of our design components, making it actually more productive, right? Like that's what cost hundreds of dollars of tokens. And of course, after I spent $700, my team was like, "Hey Liz, we're putting you on the $200 a month fixed price license because we don't want you to go over again. Like even if you only exceed that, one every 4 months, it's still worth it to cap it at $200." Okay, fine, right? But I think what actually made this successful, right? Similar to, you cannot just throw chocolate in something and make it better, right? Like, you have to have a good oven, right? Like, you have to have good cookbooks, right? Like, there's a lot of scaffolding that went into making this successful, right? Like, this was not just pure vibe coding, right? Because we have a platform team, right? We have people who develop UX and UI standards, right? Like, so there's examples for the code base to work with so that the AI tool knows what to do in order to apply this UI component to this other UI component. So skill still matters, right? Like, we are not all interchangeable software developers, or we are not entirely replaced by AI because of the fact that we have unique knowledge. There is unique information that we have about how to develop software, the history of, how all of our things came to be. We have knowledge of socio-technical systems. We have knowledge of kind of where's the complexity in our systems hidden. That's knowledge that AI does not have, right? Like AI can help us accomplish specific focused tasks. It can even, help gut check things, right? It can help us, double check that our plans are correct, but it is not a substitute for our own judgment, right? If you put chocolate in your souffle recipe, that does not mean that your souffle is going to not collapse, right? Like you have to know how to bake, you have to know how to cook. And you have to actually, have the ability to look at your souffle while it's cooking, right? Like regardless of whether it has chocolate or not. Right, so our knowledge of how to prepare food is important regardless of what ingredients we're using or what techniques we're using. So, right, like taste testing matters, right? Like, you'd rather discover that you put salt in your dish instead of in your cookies instead of sugar before you put them in the oven. That gives you a chance to redo them before you wait an hour for everything to bake. Because I've seen people on cooking competitions accidentally put salt in their cookies, and it turns out salty cookies are no good. And there are many other ingredients besides chocolate. So let's not just focus on chocolate. Let's not just focus on AI. Let's talk about everything else that's going on. So what happens when how will you know when you've put bad chocolate in, right? How will you know when your AI is going off the rails and is producing bad code? How can you actually debug code that no one in your organization understands because they weren't the ones who wrote it? And it doesn't matter, honestly, whether it's someone who has left your company or whether it's AI. In either case, you are debugging something that no one in your team has the context for, right? So you are going to have to maintain that code in 6 months, regardless of if it's your colleague who wrote it, who's left the company, or if it's an AI that helped you. Okay, now onto the observability part of the analogy. So strawberries are a natural ingredient, right? Like they are an ingredient that you just get straight off of the plant, right? Like it's not a processed ingredient. And I would argue that strawberries have this property of, you can tell whether a strawberry is bad or not, right? Like you don't have to go and taste it, right? Like you can look and see, is it red, is it green? You can look and see, is it rotten, right? So I think when we look at this process of tracing back what's happened, when we look at this process of, trying to create a dish that is healthy, that tastes good, right? Like you need a mixture of flavors, right? So yes, put chocolate in your dish, but also put, fruit or something with acidity in there, right? Like, we don't just serve like, pure ingredients by themselves. We tend to make things that are a combination, that are better flavors together. So my view is that observability without AI is still valuable, but AI without observability is a liability because it's just going to potentially be all over the place. So, unlike chocolate, where you can like hide all kinds of like rancid ingredients, right? Like, I think it's important to have visibility into what your ingredients are, where they're coming from, and to taste everything as you go along. So how does observability make software development and DevOps engineering better? I think that, we rag a lot on vibe coding, right? But I think that vibiness and kind of data-drivenness are a spectrum, not a binary yes or no thing, right? Like, yes, of course there are the people who are out there using Claude Code and, are just using YOLO mode, right? That's clearly on the more vibey side. On the less vibey side, right, like you have people, like me who are, when I'm working in a Go code base that I know well, right, like I am asking Claude Code to produce each diff it wants to land in my source tree, and I'm approving each individual change because I don't trust it, and I think that I trust my own judgment better than Claude's judgment for that, right? I think that when you are creating a feedback loop, when you're actually backing what your AI agent is doing with real data, I think that is a way to make sure that it cannot go too far off of the rails. And concretely, this example that I showed you earlier of building this UI functionality, I had a lot of cases where it was like, it's broken. It's still broken, right? Like, but also, what is the AI supposed to do with that when I just say it's broken, right? Like, how does it supposed to know what part of the system what part of the stack is not working? And it turns out that adding instrumentation, right, adding data on when are events firing, right, what data was passed to that click handler, right, like those are important pieces of information that can help make the process a little bit more deterministic. That when we're adding tests, when we're adding instrumentation for user events, when we are feeding that data back in to provide visibility into what's going on, that enables us to have a better understanding and enable our tools to actually make the changes in the correct place rather than just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that we magically fixed it by tweaking these 5 lines of code. And we don't have to write this instrumentation ourselves, right? Like our automation can help us with that. But unless we tell it to do it, it's just going to take the straightest line path from point A to point B. And it's going to assume that if I one-shot this, I'm going to get extra bot cookies. But if we just slow down a little bit and say, hey, add some instrumentation as you go, check the instrumentation, check the results of the unit tests, then that's going to result in better code. And it turns out also that tracing is really, really powerful for both angles here, both for the UI interactions themselves, as well as to be able to trace and understand what is your tool doing, what are the tool calls that it's making, and so on and so forth. Right? We shouldn't be cooking without thermometers, without smoke detectors, without spoons to taste, right? Like we should be taste testing throughout, and that's how we get better results when we cook, rather than waiting until the very end. So stop just telling your large language model it's broken or pasting console logs. Like actually give it the tools to investigate production so that it can do some degree of the taste testing itself and adjust without having to ask you. Give AI access to your tracing data so you can actually course correct in real time, right? So you can make sure that the dish has the right amount of sweetness, the right amount of salt, and so forth. And if you are using Model Context Protocol, I actually was really surprised. Model Context Protocol is a year old as of yesterday. I did not know that. This is shocking to me, that until a year ago, we didn't have the ability to give our AIs access to arbitrary tools. They only could, at best, run shell scripts or run whatever commands were built into our language models. But right, like today, you can confidently actually hand off tasks and have this API, for systems to be able to communicate with each other and to actually work together to achieve the outcome that we want. And of course, right, like, cooking is a process, right? Like, it takes skill to cook. So let's teach each other, right? Like, let's figure out what's the best use of chocolate in these dishes, right? How can we create the right combination of ingredients? What's maybe a really cool viral food hack, and what's something that actually is worth continuing to do after it stops being viral? What are our best practices, right? Like, how are we creating the right structures to enable everyone on our team to be able to effectively cook, whether they're using chocolate or not? So I think learning in public is really, really important, right? To share not just your successes, but also your failures, right? Like, to give feedback to the people who are developing these tools so that we can get better outcomes in the longer term. I think that's how we actually achieve integrating AI into our development processes rather than having it kind of artificially bolted onto everything while people are trying to apply it to the maximum number of use cases. And I think that no one needs to lose their job over AI. I think that every company that is laying off developers and citing AI as a reason is cowardly. I think that's because if you are effectively utilizing AI, why would you lay off your engineers who have just learned to use those tools incredibly effectively? It makes zero sense why people are coupling AI adoption to layoffs. If anything, successful adoption of AI means that you can get more juice out of every developer. You should be hiring more developers and training them the way that your existing developers are using AI and delivering a better product faster, right? Like, I think that's really the longer term possibility. So I think anyone that's citing AI is just, doing capitalist thing and saying, look at how productive we are, look at how much money we're saving with AI rather than actually delivering results. So as developers, right, like, our job is to use our judgment to have the skills to intervene if things go wrong, because they will go wrong, and to use automation the same way that we've always thought about DevOps and automation, right? Like DevOps and columns, right? Like A is part of columns, right? Like that is so important and has been important regardless of whether the automation we're using is deterministic or non-deterministic. So going slightly to the glass half full perspective, right? Like putting our head in the sand is not going to work. It is not too late to change your mind. And I think that if you are refusing to use AI at all, I think that that is limiting what you can do as a developer. I think that it's possible for us to engage in discussions about how to effectively use AI, of what the risks and harms are. And I think that's important to do from an informed perspective rather than from an uninformed perspective, right? Like, we should not all be Luddites who are, throwing bricks into the machinery, right? And in 5 years, I don't think people are going to care whether you have 4.5 years of AI experience or 6 years of AI experience, but I would argue that if you have 0 years of AI experience 5 years from now, that's going to be really, really conspicuous. So I think employers do care that you have at least some AI experience and have an informed perspective on what are the risks, where are the places to use it and not to use it. And let's learn in public together and keep the quality bar high. Like, let's not, just put slop everywhere. Let's not just, make fire escapes out of chocolate. Let's not just melt chocolate into everything, right? Like, I do think longer term with the economics, AI is not necessarily going to make sense in all of, I think image generation is one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. It's incredibly wasteful and there's no economic value there. Just pay artists, right? But I do think that for programming, because we are so scarce as programmers and because, as I said, 20 years ago, right, like software is eating the world, right? Like the leverage of software is so high, and also the amount of training data available to AI is so high, and also the nature of software means that it's possible to give something multiple tries, right? It's okay for automation to be 80% effective because you can safely give it multiple tries and to tell whether or not it's working correctly, right? And I do not necessarily think that that is true in other use cases. So I think as the price goes up, those other use cases might fall away, but I do know that for software development, that AI is a useful force multiplier. So yes, use AI. Use it like chocolate, purposefully, skillfully, and in combination with other ingredients. And pay attention to the ethics and the sourcing of where you're getting it from. So This is a quote from Tom Scott, a very famous YouTuber who, for many, many years, refused to do VPN ad reads because he thought that VPN advertising was like all full of shit, right? Like it was, advertising false security claims saying, oh, people can snoop on your passwords on public Wi-Fi or whatever, right? But he eventually found a VPN provider that was willing to actually listen to him on what honest messaging might look like. And he did this ad read that said, I'm kind of surprised to be endorsing VPNs this enthusiastically and saying it works for me and I find it useful, but it is and I do. So I'm okay with taking their money. Well, I think that's true for me for AI as well. I think that for many, many years, I've been upset about AI marketing, but I think that the reality has finally caught up to the hype, and that there is good in what we can accomplish today. And just because people are misusing AI the same way that people are misusing or mismarketing VPNs does not mean that the uses that I do have are not there for me. They really are. So the next time you're at a ice cream parlor, try out the chocolate and strawberry flavor. And remember that it works well because you can see both of those ingredients there working together, doing their job. And this presentation had some degree of AI help. Some of the speaker notes and punchlines were constructed by AI, but the core content is mine. And all of the images are real human-created images because, as I said, artists and humans are the ones who should create art, right? We didn't go out there looking to... we didn't go out there looking to automate art and have to sweep the floors by hand. We hoped that would be the opposite. The bots would sweep the floors and we'd have more time to make art. So let's make more art. Thank you.